I'd like to welcome the four fantastic panelists that we have today for our Women in Architecture panel that we're doing today. And to get us started, I would really enjoy all four of you introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about your backgrounds, your education, and where you currently are working.
I'll start. Good morning. I'm Emily Hinton. I graduated from UNC Charlotte in 2009, and I'm currently a principal at Lindsey Architecture in Greensboro, North Carolina.
I can jump in. I think we've got a lot of UNCC 09 people. My name is Liz Richardson. I have an undergrad in interiors from the University of Kentucky, a master's in architecture from UNC Charlotte, 2009. And I am currently a project architect and senior associate at the Charlotte studio of Perkins and Will.
All right, I guess I'll jump in. I'm Kathryn Horne. I am the Director of Planning, Design, and Construction at UNC Charlotte. I graduated from NC State. I'm not going to say the year, but I definitely get without hands down. I'm the senior person of this group. And I have a master's in architecture from Clemson University. Before I joined UNC Charlotte, I was at Georgia Tech. And prior to that, I was a partner at the FWA group here in Charlotte and started my career at Gant Huberman Architects, a firm that sadly is no longer in existence.
Hey, I'm Carol Bacon. I am also a graduate of the master's program at UNC Charlotte. I actually went to Georgia Tech for my undergrad though, did a 4-year degree there and graduated 2005. And then I worked for a couple of years before moving to Charlotte to attend the master's program here. And I now work at ADW Architects here in Charlotte, and we work in a lot of different market sectors locally and regionally as well, but I work mostly in K-12 and higher ed. And I also am a part-time faculty at the School of Architecture and teaching in first-year studio this semester.
Excellent. Well, thank all four of you so much for being here with us and sharing the great quality of UNC Charlotte architects and folks affiliated with UNC Charlotte in architecture. So if you all wouldn't mind, each telling us maybe what has been the most helpful thing that you've used as you've navigated your individual career journeys. And please feel free to answer in any order.
I can jump in with a fairly UNCC specific response, but I selected my graduate school location partly because of its location. I did not want to have to move after graduate school necessarily. I was pretty tied to my undergrad, and moving away from there was tough on me. So I decided when I was going to go to graduate school, I wanted to be able to live in that city, and attending and going through the architecture program at UNCC just set me up so well academically, but also from just an architectural community standpoint, just immediately being immersed in the industry here. And as you can imagine, I mean, Carol, Emily, we all cross paths all the time, and we're former classmates. So it's just, I was immediately drawn to the very small town feel of the program, which has also just benefited me. And I've enjoyed that experience extending into my, my professional life as well.
I can sort of add to that. I'll echo Liz's comments, but for me, that the setup for the UNC Charlotte's program really worked well with my personality. So kind of taking that into the profession, there's a little bit of a disconnect, as with any curriculum, and then going into the professional world. Obviously you learn a ton of information in school, but then, the application of it is sometimes a little bit different. So what really helped me as soon as I got out of school was finding kind of young professional groups in our industry. and really kind of surrounding myself with other like-minded people, but also the contractors and engineers. And so people that we work with, daily that don't necessarily do exactly what we do. And that really kind of helped me sort of develop not only connections and colleagues, but also kind of find some mentors and people that I could kind of look to kind of help, anytime I had a question or, what's the right thing to do here kind of conversation. So.
Hey, yeah, this is Kathryn. So I would say in general, throughout my career, what has been most helpful for me are all the people that I've met along the way, my professional colleagues, all those connections, in just so many different ways that it's hard to describe, but the people have been what have been most helpful to me.
Yeah, agreed. And identifying mentors was one of the specific things I wanted to say. I think, especially as women starting in firms, we didn't always see a lot of people in leadership that we could identify with right away. And so finding those people, whether they're just a member of an organization that you meet or through networking or some other means that can advise you and kind of help you with that guidance.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Carol, I'm going to kind of come off of what you just mentioned, but thinking of yourself as women architects, what would you say was the biggest challenge you faced as you navigated this career in architecture?
So again, I'm feeling, as somebody who graduated in the 80s, there were just so few women in the profession. And that was a challenge in a lot of ways. People just weren't used to seeing women. I worked for a firm and that was very supportive. And also their philosophy was that we took our projects from design all the way through construction. So I was out on the construction sites pretty early, and that was a pretty novel thing. So I think as far as the challenge, it was just really dealing with people had a lot of preconceived notions, I think, about what I was capable of or maybe not capable of. So hopefully y'all haven't maybe had quite the same level of challenge, but.
No, I think that's a really great point, Kathryn. I know that I have benefited so largely from spending about half of my career thus far at a firm that just really exemplifies and really supports anyone, but in North Carolina, the two studios of Perkins and Will in North Carolina are run. We kind of have a 3-part top leadership team, and 2 out of 3, the 3 of those are female. And so it's not a question in terms of pursuit of leadership. It's a given. But to Kathryn's point, experiences on job sites are a little bit different, but I think that our experience, I would say, is largely very much improved probably from what Kathryn experienced starting out. But I think it's pretty fun, and I'm guessing Kathryn did too, to kind of dispel the notions of what people may think you're capable of or not. I think that's really kind of the fun part, to show up on a site and show those boys what's up.
Yeah, and I would say that once people realize that you do know what you're talking about, things change pretty quickly.
That's what I was going to say too. I think it's probably the same for a lot of people, even if you're pretty established in your career, that you can immediately establish the authority and knowledge that you have, and for the most part, after that, there wouldn't be any questioning of your skills.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Outstanding. Well, thank you all for sharing that and kind of building upon that, because I heard, some great things out of these responses in terms of the village approach of having a mentor and having that social capital, and then also having institutions that you work with that, support you and find opportunities, for you to thrive. So could you all tell us what you like most about your job?
I'll jump in here on this one. I think all the sirens have finally passed, so I can unmute. But I think for me, the most exciting part of our job is the variety that we see every day. One of my favorite things is being out on the job site and working with the contractors in the field. And part of that might be a little bit of, kind of the validation you get from, kind of that previous question, being able to kind of go out there and establish some credibility and really be able to kind of work with them to figure out kind of the nuts and bolts of the project. I think for me, that's kind of my favorite thing, but I also kind of like being in the office and meeting with clients, working with other team members. So each day is a little bit different, which, keeps it exciting, and, each project brings new challenges and that kind of thing. So I think for me, it's really the variety and what we're kind of able to do different things, each day.
I think my favorite thing is pretty simple. I totally echo Emily's experience. Some days it's maddening because it's very often that you find yourself like, I've never done this before. How do I do this? Sometimes there's so much variety that it's a little bit jarring. But my absolute favorite part of our job is that from time to time, depending on the scale of projects you're working on, they may be a little bit less frequent, but you get to go and see something physical that was once inside your brain and that you dreamt up and now exists in the world. And that sounds really simple, but I think it's the most powerful thing about what we do. And I don't think it will ever get old walking around in space that you played a part in.
Yeah, those were the same two exact things that I had on my list. And then the third thing I think is, I've been working at ADW for 12 years, and we have a lot of employees who have long tenure at the firm, and we work really collaboratively, and I really enjoy working with the team and everybody being able to bring ideas to the table and, us put something together as a group.
So I'd echo what everyone else has said. Plus one, I think, well, two. So one, the part I love the most and what I really get to do in my job, a lot of the time in my job at UNC Charlotte, is to work with people to kind of understand their needs. And then the whole process of seeing these ideas kind of make their way onto lines on paper and actual physical space. But I love seeing things be built. I just really love to see it all take shape. And no matter how simple the project might be, just to think that was an idea, now it's actually a physical space that people are going to inhabit and use, is probably the most exciting thing to me about my job, or what I like best.
Thank you all so much for sharing that. I'm going to take a quick break from our questions to answer a student question in the chat. Danielle asked, academically speaking, what was the most challenging part of school for each of you, and how did you improve and overcome those challenges?
Great question. Great question, Danielle.
I would just start out by just empathizing. School is tough. Those 3 years were a really difficult, intensive time. I think it was a caliber, it speaks to the caliber of the education that we received and that you all are receiving, but it is tough. So it's, I think, very normal that there's a lot of challenging parts about it. If I had to kind of go more specific though, I think for anyone, time management and working between various class obligations is very similar to how you'll work between various projects. And inevitably, it feels like all of your exams are in 1 week. Well, it always happens that most of our deadlines get lumped together. So the whole being able to navigate that, and that is a constant learning process, I think. But I think that's was one of the more challenging things, just feeling that like there's so much to get done at any given period of time. And that continues. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. So that was a challenge for me for sure.
Same for me. That was the first thing that popped into my head as well. Just, yeah, being able at, fresh out of, high school and learning new study habits, and especially in our field, having studio 3 hours a day, 3 days a week. That's different than a lot of other college students, and being able to manage that time and then you spend, half the night there finishing up the project. So being able to kind of balance the rest of your life with that, I think was the biggest challenge that I had. But to Liz's point, it really prepares you for what the profession is going to be. I mean, if you didn't go through that during school, the chance for success in the profession would be much less. So it's worth it.
One of the things that I found really challenging in both undergraduate school and graduate school is the programs that I was in, we did a fair number of group projects, right? So coming out of high school, I wasn't used to project-based work too much. I mean, occasionally, but I found that really challenging. But now that I'm kind of, as you go through your career, you realize that's really what architecture is about. You're always working as part of a team. So I don't know what your curriculum's like. I don't know if you work on a lot of group projects, but just know, that's a really good preparation for the reality of what architecture is.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm in the midst of it right now. I'm actually sitting in studio. So I just wanted to get some feedback for you, since this is my first semester.
And just going back to that other comment, I mean, I couldn't have done it really without that whole network of friends and the support. And I think that was one of the really, really great things about being in an architecture program, because it's such a close knit, and I know that's true at UNC Charlotte, such a close knit, tight kind of community. I don't know if COVID's changed that, but we just lived in studios, so you knew everybody really well, and it wasn't a huge program. And so having that support system of other people who are kind of going through the same thing with you was truly, truly, couldn't have done it without them.
It's funny you say that, Kathryn, because we've noticed with the students that the class that's in second year now that was starting architecture school during COVID has struggled a little bit with some of the skills and coming along and some of the things that we tried to instill in first year. And just with them being remote and not having the opportunity to work together and learn together, I think it made it more challenging. So we are back in studio, and so far, fingers crossed, everything's been going well. So I think we are getting back to it.
Terrific. So now kind of switching the tone a little bit here, would you all mind telling us, what you like least about your jobs or being in this profession? We won't report you, I promise.
Oh, that's easy. It's all the administrative stuff that we have to do, all that boring paperwork, and you just have to do it. But if somebody else could take that off my plate, I would love it.
100%.
That's a good one. I also think, so as much as I love being on site and doing what we call construction administration, I also find it stressful sometimes. It's a great exercise in problem solving and team work and all of that. But at the end of the day, you are trying to navigate someone else's resources and time, and sometimes things that are beyond your control, sometimes things that you should have controlled a little bit better. So the actual construction process is both my favorite, but I'm gonna be honest, I lose some sleep over it as well.
Yeah, I think it's both the best and worst part too, that we work with so many different parties. As an architect, you have clients, you have consulting engineers, that's, part of your team. We have a lot of other external groups that we may have to work with through the course of a project. And sometimes they cause frustrations. Sometimes there's things that happen during the construction part of the project that causes frustrations, as Liz mentioned. So it can be stressful at times, but when that project is finished, as we mentioned, it's all water under the bridge, and you can enjoy what you've produced, even though it's often a longer process and sometimes a little bit stressful getting there.
Yeah, and for me too, I think, very similar to what kind of Liz and Carol have said. I mean, we're, ultimately on a project, you're responsible for managing, a lot of money, a large investment for your client. And something that, for a lot of them, certain clients, they're part of their job is to kind of do facilities construction. And so they're kind of used to the process. But a lot of our clients, this is the only project they're ever going to do, and so they're going to live in this building for the rest of their life, basically, their career. So it means a lot to them. So that's a lot of responsibility. So that can be equally rewarding, and it's motivating, but it also, it causes, it's always kind of in the back of your mind that, every decision you make really has a big impact on kind of the end game. And so some days that gets a little overwhelming, but to their point also, once the project's done and the dust is kind of settled a little bit, that is the best feeling. It'll never get old to walk into a building that you've had a part in designing. So it all comes out in the wash, but it's a process to get there for sure.
Thank you for all sharing that. We have another student question in the chat from Ion. Who is your favorite architect, and what is your favorite building that really inspires you?
This is top of mind for me. I actually, a former lecturer at UNCC now works over at Cal Poly, and I was speaking to her studio earlier this week about an experience that I had while at UNC Charlotte, which I got to have with my favorite architect, his name is Brian McKay Lyons. He works in Nova Scotia and just does such beautiful work. It's very different than the work I do. It's a small scale, it's a vernacular way of working. It's beautiful, it's poetic. I'm a big fan. And I would say my favorite building, this is really specific, I just think it's gorgeous. It's actually the Wild Turkey Distillery in Kentucky. It's done by a firm called DeLeon and Primer. And it's just, I think I'm drawn to very kind of formalized volumes. And it's just a very simple kind of barn form that's all kind of a charred black wood. Look it up, it's gorgeous.
I think the one that kind of the building and architect that kind of comes to mind for me, the building is unfortunately actually not there anymore, but it was the Folk Art Museum in New York City by Todd Williams and Billy Sien. And I think the biggest thing for me that I really appreciate about their work is the choice of materials and how they kind of join those together. And then really the thing about that building, the exterior is nice, but really for me, it's the quality of the interior space and how they manipulate light and again, play that with materials and things like that. So those are the types of buildings that I'm always kind of drawn to. Very simple forms, but very detailed at the same time.
Go ahead, Kathryn.
Go ahead.
Okay. Gosh, it's so hard to choose. I was just thinking through some of the recent places that I visited, and I guess the first thing I would say, just as even though this is more to the advice question, is to travel and visit new places and buildings and see different types of architecture as much as you possibly can, because it'll really just kind of broaden your thoughts and facilitates, I think, a lot of the experience that we have in architecture. And I think, actually some of the most memorable places I've been are really more historic buildings, but on a recent trip, well, an overseas trip that was before COVID, but the last international trip that I took, I went to Scotland and we saw the Riverside Museum by Zaha Hadid, and that was one of the more memorable places I've been. Just to see and experience one of her buildings up close was really a memorable experience.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's so hard to choose. There's so many different great buildings and great architects. I think different buildings for different times. I was going to say the Getty Center by Richard Meyer. I really love the way that that building is detailed. So and also I think sort of just the precision, the integration with the landscape, but the attention to detailing is really amazing. And that's something that I learned, I would say. I didn't learn that when I was in school, but working, I came to have this real appreciation for really fine detailing and really looking at even the most minute parts. And that's what the Getty Center has, if nothing else, within the larger context of a really nice setting and building.
Terrific. Thank you all for sharing that. And students and everyone, what we tried to do is find some examples of some of those inspirations and include the links to some of those in the chat. So please feel free to check that out. And we did receive another student question here from Mackenzie, which is, what is your advice for taking the AREs? And in parentheses, taking them all in one time period, spaced out, or etc.
It's been a really long time since I took the exam, but here's what I would say, having watched a lot of people that I worked with in firms go through this. I think the thing is, I mean, for me, it was have a plan. And this is what I advise people, have a plan of attack, stick to your plan, study. It is so easy. So back when I took it, it was only offered once a year. And it was like, you better take it then, or you're going to miss it for another year. Now you have a lot of flexibility, but I think that's also a challenge because people get busy because of all these deadlines that everybody mentioned. So you've got to balance work, your personal life, and when are you going to study? And it's so easy to just reschedule those. That's what I've seen other people do. I would say, make a plan. And again, I'm starting to sound like a broken record, get that support system going, study with people, and just do it.
Once you get past the first one, you get a little bit, you kind of get back in that groove of studying. So it really is all about just start. I mean, as soon as you're able to, don't put it off, because the longer you wait, the harder it is to kind of go back. But for me personally, the way I did it, I waited too long before I started. So don't do that. But once I got started, I kind of figured out how long it took me to study for the first one, and really study. And then I scheduled the rest of my exams 5 weeks apart after that. And so once I was in the groove, I just kept going. And that was a really rough few months, but after it was done, I couldn't imagine doing it any other way. So my advice would just be, schedule them. If you're in a position to do so, just get them scheduled and stick to that plan. That seemed to work pretty well for me.
And I would just echo that, like getting started early. I was chatting with some of our studio members who are in the process or thinking about getting started with testing. And one of them, asked, when will you feel ready? And I said, never. It's never gonna be a day in your practice where you're like, I think I know everything that's on those exams. If you would be waiting forever. So take that pressure off yourself and just get started. Like Emily said, as soon as you can. I think Kathryn's advice of making a plan and sticking to it is great, but also this may come from a personal experience, which wasn't an easy road, but have some grace with yourself. If you maybe don't fail your first one and tell everyone you're never going to be an architect, because you'll try it again and you'll be an architect.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice. And there's, I think, Mackenzie, you may have heard it in the firm that you're working with, but there's some newer study guides and materials out there that are pushing towards studying for either all 6 exams at once and then taking them, or splitting it 3 and 3. And then this is not the version that I don't think any of us took this version of the ARE that's out currently, but the groupings of 3 tests, there's a lot of overlap. And so it does make sense to maybe study for some of those together at the same time. But yeah, I think it's somewhat dependent on your habits and your personality. I think for me to have studied for all 6 at once and then try to sit down and take them would have been too overwhelming. And to maybe split 3 and 3 could be more manageable, but yeah, I think having a plan and a group that you're working through it with. Obviously, AIA has study groups for people who work across different firms, and you can find support that way or within your own firm. But it's good to, even if you're not sitting down and studying together, having someone who's holding you accountable and that you can also just commiserate with in the process, I think is great.
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
A great question. Thank you so much for all of your answers. Olivia also has a question. As a female, do you feel that you had a different experience as an architect, both in schooling and in professional work, compared to your male counterparts? Do you think that females bring a different perspective to the profession?
I think inevitably we do bring a different perspective. I happen to think that it's better. My experience, I happen to think this is purely opinion based, but I think what women are able to bring to leadership roles, especially, is quite different. I find that we have a bit more of a pulse on the people around us and their needs, being strong mentors. Sorry for any males, sorry, AJ, but I think we do that more successfully. I think it's a little bit more of how we're wired to be a little bit more in touch with people around us. And I think that makes for really strong leaders in our professional environments. But other than that, like there's nothing I think about being a woman that truly makes things more difficult. If anything, it's a different skill set that I think is an advantage.
And I have to say, I just love that people can ask and answer that question, because again, when I started out, I mean, the message to me and my classmates was, we needed to get in line and be more like all these men that we were. Literally, that was it. It's like, learn from them, be like them. So it's so great, just that things are so much more open and people are willing to have different perspectives and views and acknowledge even that people bring different things to the table, right?
I would sort of, I guess, expand on what Liz said a little bit. I think, women are inherently a little more empathetic typically, probably, and a lot of what we do is, we're creating spaces that it is important how the space feels. It's not just a place that you go. I mean, you walk in a space and you want to, you're trying to create an experience. And I think, a lot of what, to Liz's point, kind of the way that we're wired, probably lends itself maybe a little bit more to that. And so I think we kind of bring a lot to the table there. Now, on the flip side of that, sometimes that can, if you're out on a job site talking to a contractor, sometimes, you have to really kind of make yourself be, kind of the person in charge of that conversation. So for me, sometimes I find that to be a little bit of a challenge, and I can't speak to whether I would be that way, as a male or not. I don't know. I think for me, that's a little bit of where I think, I have to make sure that I'm intentional about how I have those types of conversations.
I think for me, yeah, it's been, and maybe similar to what you're saying, Emily, I haven't had any feelings about my male counterparts that I work with directly. If anything were to come up, I think it's more possibly a client or another contact that I may be working with on a project. And then, you can sort of quickly nip it in the bud usually. But yeah, I don't think, I mean, in school, and I feel like this was the case even when I was an undergrad, and I hope it is now, that the classes are pretty much 50-50 male, female, and in some cases even more heavily female. And so then, yeah, I guess the challenge really is more when the women are getting out into practice, we're losing steam a little bit there. So that seems to be changing. The statistics are getting better. And I think hopefully we're going to approach more of a 50-50 scenario in practice soon here.
Marvelous. Thank you all for your responses. Looks like we have another question from Danielle. Where can we potentially find resources outside of regular classes to improve our knowledge of things like construction, architecture, building physical models, learning software, etc., to improve our overall skill level and proficiency in everything? This question is for those like myself that have no prior experience before attending graduate school for a 3-year program.
I would encourage you to, there's so many different ways, right? There's summer internships, there's shadowing. You can contact, if you know anybody that works in this field locally, have them contact somebody else. Set up shadowing experiences where you go to a firm and just hang out and go to a site for a day. The Charlotte architectural community in particular, I think, is very supportive and very open to providing and helping to facilitate experiences like that. But the other part of that I wanted, so I guess just cast a wide net and talk to whoever you can, hang out with whoever will let you. But beyond that, I think once you start working, the biggest piece of advice I would give is to just ask a ton of questions. Be completely humble, assume that you don't know anything, and continue approaching things in that way. As we've mentioned, you're always going to be working with a team primarily. All those people have different experiences. They can help fill in any gaps that you have, but just ask questions, seek advice, seek best practices, just any listening ear that you can find, utilize it, and don't be too shy or too quiet or think that people know what they're doing, because they don't. Everybody's figuring it out together.
Yeah, unfortunately, Danielle, if you're in the 3-year master's, that's a pretty tight curriculum. So you're not going to have the opportunity to take a bunch of other electives and other programs unless you just want to stay in school a while and hang out. But there are classes in other colleges and construction, and that would maybe address some of the skill sets. There's also at CPCC, for example, they have Revit training courses and things like that that address technology and software, that if you're really wanting to sharpen up on that a little bit, maybe even before trying to get an internship, then that would be a possibility. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different resources for those things.
Yep, I agree. And same as Liz, the first thing that popped in my head is to shadow. I mean, a lot of firms, they only have room for a couple interns. So it may take you a little while to find an internship, but most of them, I mean, we do it quite a bit, even if we're not able to offer an internship for someone, we'll immediately offer to have them come in for a couple days and just shadow us. And sit with, each different person in the office and kind of get their perspective on what their day-to-day is. And I think that's a really great way to kind of quickly sort of gain knowledge. And then it also sort of helps you develop kind of a list of questions, because I think probably in the position you're in, you kind of don't know what you don't know. So getting into that environment probably really will help you kind of start to understand sort of, the direction that you want your career to go and that kind of thing. So I think that's a great way to do that. And then also just take advantage of, the local AIA or other professional organizations. A lot of them have really strong connections to students. And it's fun for us to get to kind of interact with students and new graduates. So I think there's probably a lot of resources there that you can kind of take advantage of as well.
Thank you all so much for answering that. Students, you are having amazing questions. Thank you for putting those in the chat. Another question that I had was, AJ and I meet a lot with students and working with them on their branding materials and how they can represent themselves as young professionals in this area. What types of tips would you offer them to help them to learn how to really brand themselves and to produce whatever you are looking for from the employer side of things so that they can really represent their skills and abilities to you effectively?
I don't know. This is not like brand specific. It may kind of start there and then extend to an interview or some kind of interaction. But I think the biggest thing that I always am looking for and what I encourage my colleagues to also look for are people with a voice. Because we can teach technical, we can teach the ins and outs of our day-to-day life, but being passionate and having a voice, having something to say and to contribute and to play an active role in what's going on around you, I think we can teach the rest. That's probably a pretty general, pretty bold statement, but I think it holds true. So I think, especially as designers, that's what the profession is looking for us to do and for how we should be operating. So that's kind of like conceptual how I think you should brand yourself and kind of and try to position yourself.
Yeah, agreed. I think having a beautiful portfolio is always nice, but when we sit down and interview people, I've been to many UNCC career expos, and the candidates that stand out are excited and want to talk about architecture and talk about a way that they can explore that passion through starting out in their career. And that's always so exciting to me to see, because you want somebody who's just going to come in day one and want to jump into things, to be willing to just start with a task and excited for the opportunity to do so and just maintain that passion that they have.
I agree. I mean, I think, when we're kind of interviewing new candidates, we like it to be more of a conversation. So be prepared to, not just answer questions, but really kind of sell your personality and who you are. That's really more what we're what we're looking for, because, you know, some of the previous conversation, you know, earlier today, you're always going to be working as part of a team. And so it's really important to be able to have some confidence when you're kind of in our position that, you know, the person that you're potentially going to bring on is able to do that, and their personality will kind of mesh with the group that we've already kind of started to establish. And so really, you know, I think the conversation, being able to talk about your work, I mean, a beautiful portfolio is super important. I mean, it shows your graphic ability, your design ability, attention to detail and things like that. But further than that, your ability to talk about your work and really kind of work through the process is really, really important. And also good grammar. That's a pet peeve of mine. Proofread your stuff, please.
Agreed. I've seen
Sorry,
many,
but I just had to put that in there.
yeah, many portfolios over the years that have spelling errors and grammar errors.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
architects always make up words.
Exactly. We
And
do.
we
Spell
use
them right.
punctuation incorrectly all the time.
Capitalizing things that don't really need to be capitalized.
Yeah.
Quick sidebar, I think it's hysterical because it's such an architect thing to do. When we graduated in 2009, there were not a lot of jobs out there. And my resume was all lowercase letters because I thought it was so cool and it was so designerly. And after I was having difficulty finding a job through the recession, my mom looked at me straight in the face and she's like, I think it's because you don't use capital letters. People don't think you know how to write. So there's a hybrid between being designerly and just looking like you have a command over the English language.
So that reminds me, just in general, with resumes and everything else, it's a balance, right, between kind of trying to show some individualism so that you'll stand out without going with font styles or whatever. And that's one thing I think you see with more younger people right out of college. There's just more of that interest in, like, how can I make my resume look really great? And sometimes it's just makes it actually harder to read and makes you wonder, like, oh my gosh. But just the harder to read part, I know that sounds silly, but when you think about it, you know, employers are, especially at the end of this, they're looking at lots of resumes over and over and over. So it's that fine balance. I don't know that this is very constructive help, but you know, it's sort of a fine balance of making yours stand out without making it like, oh my God, I can't even figure out how to read this thing. So anyway. And I will tell you, as somebody who works for the university, and now I read a lot of proposals from architectural firms, the same thing kind of still happens a little bit. Less so, but you know, it's
We are who we are.
And unfortunately, I think it's not just a profession, but even getting proposals from firms, you would not believe sometimes the stuff we see, but it's tough.
Magnificent. Thank you all so much for that. And thank you for reiterating some things that I think Suzanne and I say until we're blue in the face around, you know, what it takes to make a good resume. So as we kind of come to a close here, you know, I'd like to ask if each of you could provide us with maybe some final thoughts or final tips that we can take with us after we leave this conversation about how we can navigate our career journeys in architecture and beyond.
I may piggyback on some of Kathryn's early comments. I don't think this is at all unique to the architectural profession, but build your network and your crew and the people that are going to support you. It's a small world. I don't care where you live, and just be open to kind of a flow of help, of advice, of just experiences, because this is a team sport, and you need it to be a team sport. There's no way for any of us to exist in this type of a profession on our own. And you'd start out early like that and never stop seeking advice, seeking help, being open to new project types, it's just be open to learning from people around you.
I would echo that as well. I think it's a great profession. I could not imagine doing anything else, but it comes with its challenges. I mean, it really does. It is the equally most rewarding thing and the thing that causes me to lose the most sleep. And so just be prepared for that. I mean, it's great. I mean, obviously you're kind of getting a taste of that in school now, but kind of power through it, find your group, and kind of get it done, because the profession is awesome. It's great. But also, you know, to that point, some days it's a little tough to stay motivated. And so, you know, find something that kind of excites you, whether that's traveling and going to experience new things, or maybe it's, I don't know, you really like the technical side of it. You really, you know, want to learn about, you know, new materials. And I actually did this a few weeks ago. I went down to the concrete block plant that's not too far from here, and I watched how they make concrete blocks. I mean, that sounds really kind of stupid, but, you know, watching, you know, how things like that kind of at that level get made, and then eventually kind of it turns into, you know, a bunch of those put together turns into a really nice building. So those types of things, you've got to kind of find things that sort of help keep you motivated and excited about what you're doing. Sometimes that's going to be a really exciting project that you're working on. Sometimes projects are not that exciting, so you've got to kind of get that from other places. So I think just being aware of that, and that it's okay that some days you're not going to feel quite as motivated or excited as you think you're going to every day, and find people that you can talk to. I mean, we've kind of said that multiple times today, but mentors and peers are super important in what we do.
Yeah, one thing I want to add is, one thing I've noticed is there's a lot of emphasis in not just this profession, but all professions, as you continue through your career, about mentors. And mentors are, of course, important. But your peers, I think, are just as important, and they are your mentors in different ways, right? So sometimes I find people who are like, oh, I need to find a mentor. I need to find a mentor. You know, lots of people are going to be your mentors, including your peers. One thing I would say is, you know, it's a great profession. I always say, if anybody had ever told me that I'd kind of finish up my career working for a university, I would have said, absolutely not. There is no way that that's what I want to do. And so, you know, things change. I guess I have a perspective of a lot of years in this profession. It's such an interesting profession. There are so many ways you can go. Find out what's interesting to you. Don't just, you know, so if whatever the sort of the most interesting thing is at the moment, if that's interesting to you, then go with it. But if it's not, don't, because there are so many things like concrete blocks or super technical details, or, you know, whatever it is. And now I'm in a very non-traditional role, but it's very interesting to me. And I'm certainly making full use of all my education and all my training and all my background.
That's a great point, Kathryn. I think that you're a perfect example of maybe going down a non-traditional path with your career, whereas the other three of us are, at least currently, still in a more traditional role in architectural practice. And so I've had plenty of friends and known a lot of other people who ended up going on a non-traditional path after finishing architecture school. And getting licensed is still a great idea. We always say, no matter what you end up doing next, you should still do that. And that's another reason to get it done early, just so you always have that you can use as part of your skill set, and that training and the problem solving that we learn through being in architecture. And that, you know, you probably don't know now as a student what that path might look like for you, and that's okay. But the great thing is we do have the opportunity to pursue those passions and whatever way, and where life takes you. But I think, yeah, all the other comments were great too. And just the other things I had listed, which are along these same lines, are to just continue to be curious and pursue things, research things, go read and look things up. And obviously being involved in the organizations is another great way to connect you to new information, new resources, and things like that. And the points about peers and mentors, I will say that Liz and I get together from time to time and talk about our careers and things, and we can relate in a lot of ways too. And so you need those people. You should have those people in your life, and some of them you may be meeting right now in your classes. So
I think that is the perfect way to end this session. Kathryn, did you have anything else to say?
No, I was just going to say, architects are at our core, we're problem solvers, right? There are a lot of problems to be solved in a lot of ways. You can put all those skills to use. So.
No, thank you all. Thank you all for giving such good feedback. And I know I've learned a lot. Students, can we give all of them a virtual round of applause? It's gotten so difficult to give applauses through Zoom. But thank you so much for just all of your wisdom, your expertise, your encouragement. AJ and I do not come from an architecture background, but supporting these students, we know how challenging it is to stay focused through the program and to be very hopeful for that career right after school. And so just thank you for all of the wisdom that you gave all of us today. And students, we just encourage you to connect with these professionals on LinkedIn. Start thinking about the network that you are currently building, as all of these fantastic women have shared with you today. Your network is key. It's absolutely so important. So start thinking about those key individuals you can start connecting with. And of course, you always have AJ and myself. We're here to support you. We are here to help you build your brand, understand who you are as an artist, an architect, and a creative. So just feel free to always come and meet with us one-on-one, connect with us. We'd love to speak with you and learn about your dreams for the future and learn about what you love to do too.